Welcome, dear listener. You are here to rest now, to let go of the weight of the day. Find a quiet place within yourself where you can breathe slowly and easily. Perhaps you are lying beneath a blanket or resting your head against a pillow. That feels cool and soft. Wherever you are, let this moment become gentle, calm, and unhurried. This is a story of love, not the loud kind, not the restless kind, but the quiet, steady kind of love that lingers like the hush of the sea at dusk. A story that moves slowly with no need to hurry. A story that carries you into dreams. It is the story of a traveler named Theo and the compass he carried. A compass that spun without end, as if caught between directions, searching for something it had not yet found. And it is the story of what happened when the compass finally stilled, pointing not north, not south, but toward the quiet presence of love itself. Let us begin softly as the evening opens like a slow tide. Theo had been walking for many weeks, across winding roads, over bridges that whispered with age, past fields where tall grass bent and swayed like sighs, always with his compass in hand. It was not a useful compass, not anymore. Its needle spun slowly, endlessly, as though caught in a dream it could not wake from. Most would have tossed it aside, called it broken, useless. But Theo could not. Each evening, as the sun slipped away, he would take it out from his pocket. The little case was warm from the day's journey, the glass smudged with fingerprints, the brass rim dulled by years of touch. He would open it just to watch the needle turn, round and round, steady in its restlessness, and something in that endless spinning seemed to echo his own heart searching, not lost, but not yet found. He remembered when he first found it. It had belonged to his grandfather, tucked away in a small wooden box lined with velvet. The man had told him it was a traveler's tool, though long ago it had stopped pointing north. Maybe, his grandfather had murmured once, it is not broken at all. Maybe it just hasn't chosen its true direction yet. Theo had been a boy then, too young to understand. Now, with the years stretched behind him, those words had softened into something that felt almost like truth. A tea night, when the stars spread across the sky like scattered petals, Theo would lie awake, the compass resting on his palm. The spinning needle lulled him, almost like a lullaby. The hush of crickets, the sigh of leaves, the compass turning and turning. He wondered sometimes if perhaps it was waiting, waiting the way he was. And so he carried it with him, mile after mile, through markets where voices rose and fell like song, through quiet meadows heavy with the scent of clover, through little towns where lanterns burned low in windows. He walked with a gentle purpose, though he would not have been able to say what he was looking for. All he knew was that the compass belonged in his pocket, and that one day perhaps it might tell him why, on certain evenings when the sky glowed deep blue and the air was filled with the salt of the distant sea, he felt a quiet take not sharp, not painful, but soft and patient, like a longing for something unnamed, a direction not yet seen. And as the compass spun endlessly and beautifully, Theo found himself whispering to it as if it were listening. Show me, he would say, barely more than a breath, one day. Show me, and still the needle turned, later that night by the glow of a lantern's flame. Theo set the compass down beside him. The shadows shifted, long and slow, across the canvas walls of his tent. He closed his eyes, letting the sound of waves in the distance mingle with the soft turning of the compass in his mind. And before sleep carried him away, he felt a gentle certainty that something awaited him, just beyond the horizon. Something the compass knew, even if he did not. Morning came softly. The sun did not rush to rise, it crept gently over the horizon, turning the sea into pale silver like liquid glass. Theo walked along the path that curved toward the harbor, his boots brushing against stone that had been worn smooth by years of quiet travelers. The air smelled of salt and pine mingled, with the faint sweetness of bread being baked somewhere close. Gulls called lazily, their wings stretching wide, carried by currents of air that shifted and glided without sound. It was the kind of morning that felt like it had been waiting for him, as though the tide and sky had agreed to meet him there. Theo reached into his pocket, as he always did, and brought out the compass. The brass case caught a little of the sunlight, a soft gleam like a sigh of gold. He opened it. The needle spun, always spinning, steady in its endless turning. He smiled faintly, a smile not of joy nor sadness, but of familiarity. This was how it always was. And yet, as he stepped onto the wooden planks of the harbor, something shifted. A breeze carried across the water. The boards beneath his feet creaked softly, and then stillness. Theo stopped walking. He held the compass up, blinking at it in the morning light. The needle had stilled. It no longer circled. It no longer trembled. It pointed, calm and clear, as if it had finally remembered its purpose. He followed its direction not far, only a few steps ahead. There, sitting near the edge of the harbor, was a figure, a woman, quiet, unhurried, bent slightly forward with a sketchbook resting on her lap. Her pencil moved gently across the page, tracing the outline of a boat tethered nearby. Theo stood, very still, the compass trembling faintly in his hand, though the needle did not waver. It pointed straight, unwavering, toward her. He did not approach at once. Instead, he let the moment rest around him, like the hush of dawn, the sound of the tide slipping against the posts, the murmur of sails shifting, the faint scratch of pencil against paper. It was all part of the stillness that had entered his life so suddenly, so gently. He thought of his grandfather's words. Perhaps it had not been broken. Perhaps it had only been waiting. The woman tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her head tilting slightly as she studied the boat in front of her. There was a serenity in her presence, as if she too belonged to the rhythm of the harbor. Theo lowered his eyes again to the compass. Yes, the needle had chosen, not north, not east, not south, not west. But her. He exhaled slowly, the air leaving him in a quiet breath he had not realized he was holding. And in that breath, something shifted in him to something that felt like the soft opening of a door he had never noticed before. He took a slow step forward and another. The harbor stretched on in both directions, but Theo's path seemed narrowed now, drawn to a single point, as if the world itself leaned toward her. And as he drew a little nearer, the woman paused in her sketching. She lifted her head just slightly, as if sensing his presence. Though she did not turn to look, a stillness passed between them, a hush in the air, like the space between one tide and the next. Theo did not yet speak. The moment was not ready for words. Instead, he closed the compass gently, the soft click sounding almost like a secret. And he slipped it back into his pocket, his hand resting there as though to steady his own heart. Later that morning, as the gulls drifted higher and the light grew warmer, Theo sat on a nearby bench, not too far from her, not too near, close enough to feel her presence, far enough to leave the quiet intact. And together, though apart, they watched the harbor move with the slow rhythm of sails and waves, as if the whole day had decided to stretch itself into calm. The hours of the harbor drifted gently, like boats rocking on the tide. Theo remained where he was, not far from the woman with the sketchbook. He did not rush to speak, nor to move closer. It felt enough for a while, simply to share the same air, the same sunlight, the same quiet rhythm of the day. From time to time, he lifted his eyes toward her. The way her hand moved across the page was unhurried, graceful. Her fingers held the pencil loosely, pausing often to look at the water, before returning to the lines she shaped. He could not see what she drew, not fully, but he could sense the care in it, as if she were not only sketching boats, but sketching the stillness they carried with them. Theo reached into his pocket, brushing his thumb across the compass case. He did not open it again. He did not need to. He knew where it would point. The certainty of it, soft and quiet, rested inside him like a secret warmth. After a while, the woman shifted. She set her pencil aside, closing her sketchbook with a slow motion, as though finishing a thought. Her gaze lifted toward the sea, not hurried, not searching, but simply resting on the horizon. And then, gently, her eyes turned toward him. There. Gazes met. It was not sudden, not startling. It was as though it had been happening all along, and only now had he noticed. Her eyes were calm, steady, with a kind of clarity that seemed to quiet everything around them. Theo felt a small smile touch his lips, unbidden, and softly her mouth curved too, the faintest shadow of a smile that felt more like a welcome than any word could. He rose slowly from the bench. Not quickly, not with intent, but with the ease of a man following a tide that had already decided its course. Step by step, he crossed the space between them. The wooden boards creaked lightly under his boots, carrying the sound of his approach. In small, steady notes, when he came near, he paused, leaving a gentle space between them, close enough to be part of her moment, far enough to let her choose the silence. And for a time, they simply stood together, the hush of the harbor wrapping them in its arms. At last, she spoke, her voice low, soft, almost like the hush of the sea against the pier. "Do you travel often?" The question was simple, but it carried a warmth that felt like sunlight through leaves. Theo nodded, his own voice matching hers in tone, as though it belonged to the same rhythm. "I walk more than I stay. The road has been my companion for some time." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with calm curiosity. "And what brings you here?" Theo hesitated, not because he did not know what to say, but because the answer was not one he could easily put into words. His hand drifted toward his pocket, feeling the compass resting there. He let a small smile soften his face. "Perhaps." "The tide did," he said gently, "or perhaps something else." The woman lowered her gaze, her smile deepening just slightly, as if she understood more than he had said. She reached for her sketchbook, opening it and turning it toward him. The page showed the harbor, sketched in faint, delicate strokes, the boats, the pier, the curve of the horizon. But in the corner, almost hidden, was a small figure, seated on a bench. Him. Theo's breath caught softly, though not in surprise, rather in the feeling of being seen, as if she had noticed him even before their eyes had met. Her fingers rested lightly on the page, her touch gentle, protective of the lines she had drawn. "It felt," she murmured, "as though you belonged there." The words settled over him like a quiet blessing. He bowed his head slightly, his voice warm and low. "And it feels," he answered, "as though I was meant to." The tide swayed, the gulls called, and the day stretched softly around them. Between them, the silence grew not empty but full, filled with the presence of two souls who had, without hurry, found one another in the turning of the world. And all the while, deep in his pocket, the compass rested still, steady, unwavering. The afternoon drifted softly into evening. The light over the harbor changed its color, shifting from bright gold into a softer shade. The sky brushed with lavender and rose. The boats rocked in their berths, their ropes creaking in a rhythm that matched the hush of the tide. Theo and the woman remained close, sharing the quiet as though it had been made for them. She had not asked his name, nor he hers. There seemed no need. Names belonged to the world of introductions, of beginnings. What passed between them felt older, as though it had been waiting long before this day. At last, as the shadows stretched longer, Theo drew the compass from his pocket. He turned it in his hands, the brass warm from his touch, the glass catching the last light of the setting sun. He hesitated, then let the silence shape his words. "This compass," he said softly, his voice carrying no weight but truth, "has never pointed north. Not since I have known it. The needle has spun endlessly, as though it were searching for something that did not exist." He looked down at it. The needle did not move. It remained still, calm, unwavering, pointing not at the horizon, not at the sea, but toward her. "For years," Theo continued gently, "I thought it was broken. I carried it not for direction, but for memory. It belonged to my grandfather. He once told me, 'Perhaps it is not broken at all. Perhaps it is only waiting.'" His voice softened further, more to himself than to her. "And now, I think I understand." The woman did not reach for the compass. She only looked at it and then at him, her gaze quiet and steady, as though she too saw what it meant. Her eyes held no surprise, only a recognition, like one who sees a reflection they have always known. Theo let the compass rest in his open palm between them. The brass glowed faintly in the dusk. The needle did not shift, not even with the breeze. It stayed true, as though it had always been meant for this. The woman's lips curved into the softest of smiles. Her voice, when it came, was low, tender, like a tide speaking to the shore. "Then perhaps it was never meant to point north." Theo met her gaze, and in that meeting was the realization, gentle but full, the compass was not a tool of travel at all. It was a keeper of longing, and longing, at last, had found its rest. They did not speak further of it. Words now would only thin the moment. Instead, they sat together as the sky deepened, their shoulders near, the hush between them thick with calm. The lanterns of the harbor flickered one by one, their lights soft and golden, swaying with the evening air. Theo closed his hand around the compass, slipping it back into his pocket, but he no longer carried it as he once had. It was not a mystery anymore. It was a truth, quiet and steady, that would remain with him whether the compass spun or stilled. Beside him, the woman let her sketchbook rest in her lap. She had stopped drawing, but she had not stopped seeing. She watched the horizon, then the boats, then him, her eyes calm, patient, and kind. And in that stillness, Theo felt it. The compass had not led him here by chance. It had led him to her, not to change the path of his life, but to show him that the path had always been waiting for this meeting. The tide shifted once more, carrying the harbor into deeper evening. The sky pressed gently into night, stars beginning to bloom one by one, and Theo sat with her, not needing to ask where tomorrow would lead. For the first time, he felt that wherever he went, he had already arrived. The days that followed unfolded like quiet pages of a book, turned slowly, carefully, without hurry. Theo remained by the harbor, though he had thought he would only pass through. Each morning, when the gulls stirred and the first sails slipped out into the open water, he found himself walking the same path. And each morning, the compass pointed, steady and sure, toward her. She was often their sketchbook balanced on her knees, eyes watching the boats, her presence as calm as the tide itself. Sometimes she sketched. Sometimes she only sat in stillness, letting the day rest around her. And Theo would join her, not asking, not announcing, but simply arriving, as though he belonged in that space beside her. They spoke little. Their words were like stones gently placed in water, each one sending ripples that lingered long after the sound had faded. He told her one evening, about the fields he had walked through, golden wheat bending like waves in the wind. She listened, her eyes steady, as though she were walking those fields beside him. In return, she spoke of the harbor in winter, when the water grew dark and the air thick with the smell of wood smoke. Her voice carried the memory as though it were a lantern held in her hand, glowing softly in the dusk. But more often than not, silence stretched between them. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind that felt full, a silence made of presence, of trust, of simply being. The kind of silence that feels like a homecoming. One afternoon, as the light grew warm and the air hummed with the soft murmur of waves, Theo took the compass from his pocket. The needle leaned toward her, as it always did. He held it out, resting it gently in his palm so she might see. "It never wavers," he murmured, "no matter where I stand." She looked down at it, then at him, her eyes thoughtful and kind. And then, without words, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the edge of the compass, not to take it, but simply to touch it, to share the stillness it held. The warmth of her hand lingered in the air between them. Theo felt his chest ease, as though something long unsettled had finally settled. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding, and in that breath was peace. That evening they walked together along the pier. The lanterns swayed gently above them, their glow painting the wooden boards in circles of gold. The sea whispered below, and the sky, deepening to night, offered its first stars. They did not hurry. They moved at the rhythm of the tide, step by step, as if time itself had slowed to match their pace. At one point, their hands brushed lightly, almost as though by accident, but neither of them pulled away. Instead, they let their fingers rest near one another, close enough that the air between them hummed with quiet warmth. Theo thought. Of all the miles he had walked, all the nights he had spent with only the compass for company. And now, walking at her side, he understood. The journey had not been toward a place. It had been toward this stillness, toward this presence, toward her. The compass rested in his pocket once more, but he did not need to look at it. He knew without question where it would point. For the first time in his life, direction no longer mattered, because he was already where he was meant to be. As the night folded itself gently around them, Theo felt no longing, no ache, no searching, only peace, soft, steady, and full. Night deepened slowly over the harbor. The last colors of day rose, lavender, gold faded into a velvet blue, soft and endless. The sea, once shimmering with light, now lay dark and calm, carrying the reflection of lanterns like drifting stars. Theo and the woman walked to the end of the pier, where the wooden boards met the hush of the open water. They stood there for a time, watching the boats sway gently, their sails folded like wings at rest. The air was cool and still, with only the faintest breeze carrying the scent of salt and pine. Theo reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the familiar shape of the compass. He drew it out one last time. In the glow of the lantern light, the brass gleamed softly, and the needle rested in perfect stillness. It no longer spun. It no longer wavered. It pointed, calm and sure, toward her. He opened his palm, showing her. She looked at it quietly, then back at him. Their eyes met, steady, kind, filled not with surprise, but with a deep recognition. No words were spoken, for none were needed. Theo closed his hand around the compass, then let it rest again in his pocket. But he knew now that it was not the compass that had found its direction. It was him. They sat together on the edge of the pier, their feet hovering above the water. The boards beneath them creaked lightly, the tide lapping gently below. Overhead, the stars multiplied, filling the night with soft light, each one pulsing like a heartbeat in the sky. For a long while, they said nothing. Their shoulders brushed. Faintly, their breath rising and falling in quiet rhythm. The silence between them felt like a lullaby, slow and endless, carrying them deeper into calm. And as the harbor settled into sleep, the compass too seemed to sleep. Its stillness was no longer a question, no longer a mystery. It was simply peace. Theo leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting over the stars. He thought of the long roads he had walked, the nights spent beneath unfamiliar skies, the endless spinning needle, and he thought of this moment of her presence, steady as the tide, soft as the night air. His journey no longer stretched ahead of him like an open road. It had folded gently inward, like sails drawn in after a voyage. The woman rested her sketchbook beside her, closed now, its pages filled with quiet moments captured in pencil lines. Her hands lay loosely in her lap, her eyes lifted toward the stars. She did not speak, but Theo felt her nearness as clearly as the tide against the pier. It was enough, more than enough. The night deepened further, the harbor hushed into stillness. Lanterns swayed slowly, their flames bowing in the breeze. Boats rocked like cradles on the water. The sky stretched endlessly above, a dome of light and shadow. Theo closed his eyes. The sounds of the harbor folded around him, the whisper of the tide, the murmur of ropes, the soft sigh of the wind. And beneath it all, the steady presence of the woman beside him, as if she were the compass now, guiding him not by direction, but by peace. The compass rested, the harbor slept, and love drifted, soft and unseen, like sails over calm waters. And now, dear listener, the story rests. The compass has found its stillness, and Theo has found his quiet direction. Love has arrived not in suddenness, but in the gentleness of presence, of silence, of peace. As you close your eyes, imagine the harbor quiet, calm, the stars above, the water beneath. Imagine the compass in your hand, steady, pointing not to a place, but to peace itself. Let your breath move with the rhythm of the tide. Let your body rest as the night folds softly around you. You are safe, you are calm, and as the compass rests, so may you. Drift now into dreams.